This video deals with absorption costing. The aim of absorption costing is to calculate the total cost of each unit by incorporating an appropriate share of the company's overheads. Clearly, when we work out the cost of a product, we will include direct labour, raw materials, machine time. These are the obvious ingredients for cost. These are the obvious components. But we also have to include the costs of the marketing department, or the cost of the HR department, or the cost of maintenance for the premises. So there are many other costs that need to be included, and accountants need to find a way of generating costings on the product which will reflect the overheads as well as the variable costs of production. Now, before we go much further, we have to say that there are various techniques in looking at absorption costing, and there are different approaches to this issue. So we need to look wider to get a fuller picture of how this type of costing is implemented in practice. There are different perspectives, and there will be therefore different videos on different issues associated with this topic. However, the process of absorption costing is done as follows. First of all, identifying cost centers. These may be departments of a company with a departmental head responsibility for the performance of the cost center. So it could be we have a cost center and we have a head of department or a manager who is responsible for the costs of that center. We then allocate the costs which belong to the cost centers. So we need to look at the various costs, the headings for the various costs. It could be administration, it could be power usage, or it could be labour, labour inputs. So it depends on what it is. So we need to allocate those costs to the which belong to the various cost centres. Apportion remaining costs on a fair and meaningful basis. So they need to be apportioned in a way which is fair and honest and reflects what their contribution is, their importance, but also the value of the cost itself. Now, to do this, to apportion the costs, there are various ways in which it can be done. It could be done, for example, on the floor area. So, for example, if the government levies a tax on the business based on the size of the floor area of the company, then the various departments who use floor area, for example, the stores, the machine shop, the offices, they all have a floor area. Now, it may be possible to work out the percentage of the floor area for each of these various departments, and then work out the cost of the tax that the government imposes and apportion it according to those percentages. That could be a way of apportioning rent. It could be done on the basis of the number of employees, but it becomes a little arbitrary sometimes how to apportion particular overheads. So maintenance, for example, very difficult to apportion maintenance. On what basis can it be apportioned? On floor area? There could be an argument made that maintenance is a reflection of the size of the various departments, the amount of maintenance they require. But it could also be a function of the type of technology and the type of processes that the various departments are using, as to whether they're wearing out or exhausting the resource more quickly than other departments. So the basis for the apportionment is slightly arbitrary and subject to debate, and this is a topic we come back to in other videos as well. Reapportion service cost centres, this is called secondary apportionment, over production cost centres. So it may be the case that simply the cost of a total department is taken, for example the marketing department, and then it's apportioned over the other departments. So it's allocated out and incorporated into the costing for the product. What it means, of course, for the marketing personnel who are responsible for pricing is they know then that the price of the product will cover all the costs of the business. It'll cover the raw materials, the direct labour, machine time, but it'll also cover marketing, human resource management, maintenance on the buildings. It'll cover all of the various costs of the business. So therefore, the buyer of the product is contributing towards those various overheads. Costs may be grouped together in cost centres. These cost centres are often the functional departments of the company. So often it may be just for convenience to take a functional department, one that does some activity, undertakes some activities, perhaps the machine shop, and the costs of the machine shop then are worked out. The overhead costs of the machine shop are worked out and apportioned to the number of units produced. But so also are other functional areas. As I said, the marketing department, the accounts department, the HR department, all of these various departments need to be accounted for and they need to be financed. So they are going to be, their costs are going to be incorporated into the costings of the product. An overhead cost usually relates to the cost to a cost centre and it may be allocated to it. So an overhead cost, sometimes it's possible to identify who's using that particular overhead and then allocate it to a particular cost centre. At least that will give more accountability for that particular overhead. The person responsible for the cost centre must account for the overhead and must ensure that the overhead is both necessary and used efficiently. If an overhead relates to more than one cost centre, it must be apportioned on some fair and meaningful basis. And that's when there are problems, when overheads overlap different departments. The HR department, well, its activities cuts across all of the various departments of the business. So all of the various departments should make a contribution towards the HR department, because the HR department is servicing them by providing training programs and recruitment and managing employee welfare, health and safety and so on. So in that case, the HR department cuts across all of the other departments in the organisation. The choice of bases varies from cost to cost. For example, the basis could be, say, floor area. Well, the floor area could account for rates, which is like a local tax, rent on the premises, heating, cleaning, lighting. So the floor area would be perhaps a good basis for apportionment, a good way of allocating overheads. Look at various departments and look at the bills for the rates, the rent, the heating, the cleaning and the lighting. Add those together and then apportion it according to the size of each department, the floor area for each department. Likewise, look at the canteen, for example. If there is a canteen where the workers and management are able to go and relax for a few moments and perhaps have a warm drink or a hot drink. So there may be a canteen, or there could be health and safety. Now that could be related to the number of employees. That could be the basis for the apportionment in that case. The HR department could be linked to the number of employees as well. And the value of plant and machinery, depreciation and insurance. So the value of the plant and machinery could be linked to the amount of depreciation or the amount of insurance that the organization takes on. So it's trying to allocate resources on some meaningful basis. Now the information given below, we're about to see, relates to a 4-week accounting period. In this particular example, for a fictitious company, we call it WHW, and you're required to prepare an overhead analysis using the following data and calculate suitable overhead rates for each department. Now that's the task in this particular example. So we're given this information. We've got machining, assembly, finishing and stores. So we have 4 departments. And then we're given information about the area each one occupies. Machining, for example, has 24,000 square foot. Assembly has 36,000 square foot. Stores has 4,000 square foot. It's got plant and equipment in thousands of pounds. It's got number of employees. Machining has 400. Assembly has 800. It's got direct labour hours, direct wages, direct machine hours, and the number of requisitions on the stores, the number of times the stores are called upon to supply materials. And we also have the allocated costs, indirect wages, indirect materials, maintenance and power. Now that's information that we've been given. Now during the period the following data was recorded. Rents were £2,000, business rates £600, insurance on buildings £200, lighting and heating £400, and so on. Cleaning of factory premises at the bottom was £800. The total bill was £57,670. Now what we need to do is allocate this on some meaningful basis throughout the various departments. So let's start with looking at the basis for apportionment. Now let's take rent here. We've got machining, assembly, finishing and stores as 80,000 square feet. Now you'll recall that this was what we had earlier. The area occupied was 24, 36, 16,000 and 4,000, looking across the top: machining, assembly, finishing and stores. So there you are, 24,000, 36, 16 and 4, machining, assembly, finishing and stores, adding up to 80,000 square feet. Now the bill for the rent is £2,000, so we need to find out how much each of the 4 departments, how much they should pay towards that. So we'll do the first calculation on machining, for example. Well, machining is 24,000 divided by 80,000, which is equal to 0.3, and 0.3 times £2,000 is £600. In other words, the machining department should pay £600 of the total rent bill. That's their cost. So we put in the £600 there. So that's assigned to the machining department. For the assembly we got 36,000 divided by 80, which is approximately 0.5, there or thereabouts. 0.5 times 2,000, well, in this case is equal to 900. I've worked it out precisely. So it's 900. It's not 1,000 as you would expect, because I've rounded the figures, the 0.5. So we've got 900, and we insert the 900 there. For the next one, we have 16,000 divided by 80,000, which is £400, and we insert that there. And the stores is the next one at £100. Now, costs have been apportioned because it's not possible to allocate a cost to a specific cost centre. In this case, the cost is going to be shared out over 2 or more cost centres according to the estimated benefits received by each cost centre. So, for example, assembly pay the most at £900 of the rent because they've got a bigger area. So they've got a bigger area, they pay more. Stores only pays £100 because they've got a small area. So now the various departments, machining, assembly, fishing and stores, they know what they have to pay to cover the rent for their particular section. So we could go through rent, business rates and so on and tot it all up in the way we've just calculated it, and we will find it comes to, when we add all of those together, we find it comes to 57,670 if we add the column, and if we add the final row, 17,301 plus 25,952 plus and so on, we get back to the 57,670. And any one of these we could just simply calculate, just as a reminder, with the finishing department, we have a bill for lighting and heating of £400 for the whole institution. The whole company gets a bill of £400. We have the finishing, the number of employees here as 200. That's the basis for the apportionment we're going to use, number of employees. So we have 200, and it's 200 divided by 1,420, which is the total number of employees. 200 divided by that is equal to 0.14. 0.14 times 400 is 56. And that's how we get the 56 there. And that's how we have apportioned the costs. According to Lucy, the objective of the overhead absorption, the overhead absorption process is to include in the total cost of a product an appropriate share of the company's total overheads. So the cost of each department has been worked out by allocating costs which were received, or bills which were received by the institution, by the company, and these were allocated out to the various departments on some basis. It could be floor area or number of employees or the power that each department uses. On some basis it's been allocated out, and when we do that we get this type of table here. So each department, say the machining department, knows it owes 16,245 pounds for overheads, out of a total bill for overheads of 57,670. Now, overhead costs are indirect costs, they're fixed, which do not change despite the level of activity. So for the company, the business rates, or the tax that the government imposes, the local tax the government imposes on the business, that's fixed irrespective of the amount of production, the level of production. So the company could produce a lot, it'll still have the same bill, or produce little. Absorption costing is used to absorb overheads into product unit cost. This is done by using an overhead absorption rate, which is known as the OAR, the overhead absorption rate. To calculate the overheads absorbed by a product, it's necessary to establish the OAR, the overhead absorption rate. This is done by dividing the total overhead attributed to a given cost center by the productive capacity used in making the product. So the best way to deal with this, because it does sound a little complex, is to look at an example. So it's the budgeted overheads divided by the budgeted activity level. So look at the overheads for a department that have been budgeted, and then look at the budgeted activity level, the expected activity level, and that gives the overhead absorption rate. The productive capacity is normally measured in machine hours or labour hours, which depends on that particular activity in the cost centre. So it's necessary to look at the productive capacity of the centre, see what it can produce, what it normally can produce, and look at the budgeted overheads for that centre, which gives an idea of the overhead absorption rate. The OAR is calculated in advance of the accounting period, which means that the OARs are budgeted figures. So generally speaking, these are estimates that management work out before the accounts come in. So they know what they expect, and they can then look for variations and deviations from that projected figure. So they know what to expect from various departments in terms of output, and they know what the overheads are likely to be for each department. So they can work out what the absorption rate should be. Then they look at the real figures, having done the calculation with real figures, and they can look for variations and to find out why is there a difference. And this is a measure of their managerial ability and their understanding of the business, and it brings scrutiny into play in terms of their management skills and their intervention to ensure that what was expected was reasonable and what happened was also reasonable and accountable. Actual overheads and actual production are not known until the end of the period, and then the amount of under or over absorption may be calculated. And that amount of under or over absorption, as I said, should bring management into play. They should investigate why was there under or over. Why was their estimates out? Did something go wrong? Was there something wrong with their system of estimating, or was there something wrong within the organisation? So they can investigate why there was a difference and account for why there was a difference. A company must calculate its selling price for its products that allow it to recover its total overheads. Simply if it doesn't recover its total overheads, the company is not going to exist. It's going to go out of business. It must cover its direct costs and its overheads. In order to do this, an absorption cost of the product must be applied. And this, for example, could relate to direct labour, direct materials, direct expenses, plus the overheads. And that's the absorption cost of the product. So, in this way, the company knows that the costing of the product should cover all the expenses of the business. And please note here, we haven't spoken about profits. Essentially, the objective here is to make sure that the business survives. If the company sells a lot in excess of what it had assumed it would sell, then it will generate profits. Now, predetermined overhead absorption rates. Well, overhead absorption rates are predetermined. That is, they are calculated in advance of the period over which they will be used, so that managers have an overhead rate permanently available which they can use in production costing, price quotations and so on. Clearly, from one period to the next, management information has built up. They know what the overheads within various departments are. They know what the rates they've applied in the past. They know if there was under or over absorption. So they're able to tweak the figures. But this is useful because it enables them to work out their pricing very precisely in the coming year. But in the coming year, the figures they're using are really based on the previous year's figures. But it's better than nothing. It's better than just guesswork. And that's the belief. So they apply the figures that they have estimated to be realistic based on their experience and the past history of the business. The actual overhead costs and activity levels are not known until the end of the period. It would not be desirable for managers to have to wait until the end of the period before they had a rate of overhead that they could use on a day-to-day basis. They need to make decisions on the day-to-day. They can't wait to the end to find out what the figure actually was. They need to work out their pricing now. Their competitors may be changing prices in the market. They need to know to what extent they can reduce their prices or to what extent they need to increase their prices. And to do this on the basis of previous calculations. They're using their managerial skills to update that information. They may discuss increases in costs over the previous months or the previous year and adjust the figures accordingly. But at least they've got something to work with. So that's advantageous to them. They're not working blind. They're not working without any direction. The problem with using predetermined overhead absorption rates is that the actual figures for overheads and for the absorption base are likely to be different from the estimates used in calculating the absorption rates. It is this difference, I should say, which causes an under or over absorption of production overheads. Clearly, as time goes by, figures do change. So if the management are using last year's figures and using those in the current year for absorption purposes, the situation may have changed. Costs may have changed, overheads may have changed, usage of overheads may have changed, the type of overheads may have changed, technology may have changed, many things may have changed. And therefore there's likely to be differences, under or over absorption in the current period. All as management can do is to try and keep up to date with the changes and try to adjust the figures. But it's not always easy to adjust the prices in the market. Customers can be alienated by changes in prices simply because management found that they need to account for some additional overheads, and the prices therefore must be increased because those overheads must be absorbed. That's not good enough. The customers don't want to hear about that. They want to have a stable price, and they don't want to be alienated by price changes. So it's not possible for the managers to frequently and almost arbitrary from the perspective of the customer for them to just change the prices. Under absorption takes place when the total amount of overheads recovered is less than the actual overheads incurred in the period. So sometimes if the calculations are done, say in one time period, then applied in the next time period, it may be that the overheads have increased in the price that has to be paid for them, or the types of overheads have changed. Something has changed, and if the previous absorption rates were used, then it may be that there's a gap at the end of the year. Now that could be quite serious for the profitability of the business, because what it means is that the overheads have not been paid for. So on the accounts it will appear as a loss. Overabsorption happens when the total overheads that are absorbed is more than the actual level of overheads for the period. Now that could be a good thing because it seems like it will generate extra profits because the company has estimated the overheads and has, in a sense, generated a surplus as a consequence. But it's not good management. Perhaps the management could have used an opportunity to cut the price in the market or have more sales activity, which would have given the business more long-term stability. So instead of just waiting to the end to find that it's been charging too high a price throughout the period, and perhaps losing sales and losing its reputation as a consequence, it could have reacted to this had it known that the absorption rate was too high for the overheads. There are many reasons why under and over absorption occurs. There could be errors in calculating the overheads. Sometimes it's not possible to get precise valuations, particularly for, let's say, the premises or for machines which have to be depreciated. Well, there are two main methods of depreciation. One is called straight line, where we simply take let's say the value of the machine. Let's say the machine cost £1,000 and it's going to last 10 years. So we divide 1,000 by 10, so every year we say it loses £100 in value. That's called straight line. It's not very scientific. It's easy to calculate, however, but it may not reflect the actual value of the machine at any one time. The other is called reducing balance, much more complicated. It simply means knocking off a percentage of the machine every year. So it may be that they decide that the reducing balance is, let's say, 50%. So they buy a machine for £1,000. In the first year they write off £500. They write off half it, which means the machine is only worth £500 at the end of the year. Then they write off another 50%, so it's only worth £250 the following year, and so on, until finally it's written off completely. Now that's one way in which there could be errors. The values of the overheads are not properly taken into account because it's difficult to work out what the market value of that particular asset is. So that's one way that over or under absorption may occur. If the methods of production change, this will have an effect on the overhead as well. And methods of production do change because of changing technology. So there are problems about looking into the types of assets that the company's got and the way it utilizes those assets in the face of change. Sometimes existing assets may become obsolete because the technology has changed. It's not compatible with new pieces of machinery or whatever. There may be a decrease in overhead costs due to environmental factors. It could be a decrease because the company has to invest in, let's say, greener technology. But in the long run, it's cheaper to run. Possible. It could be also, of course, instead of saying decrease, we could say increase, because sometimes organizations have to engage in environmental schemes which are kind to the environment, which are costly to the organization. Again, leading to under or over absorption. And the valuation of work in progress may occur in the wrong process. Actually, the work in progress is difficult to value, because work in progress, essentially it's the raw materials which has had some work done on them, but now they're waiting to be completed, or they're in the stores waiting for a new order or whatever. But in a sense, they're only just worth scrap value at that moment until they become the completed product. So it's very difficult to value work in progress. Work in progress is the summation of raw materials plus effort to get them to that stage. But in a sense, they have not contributed anything to the business. They are just raw materials which have been processed to a certain level and then left. But they haven't brought in any revenue to the business. There could be unexpected changes in production output. This can be attributable to many factors. It could be there are issues with labour. The workforce may be unhappy about certain policies of the business and perhaps have strike action, which will affect production and output. Or it could be that there's adverse climatic effects, which means supplies of raw materials can't get through. There are many factors which could affect production and which will affect the absorption rate. Recent developments in absorption costing methods. Well, historically the most common method of absorbing production overhead has been based on direct labour hours. That's the one which was most widely used. They look at the number of labour hours and use that as a basis for apportioning and absorbing many overheads within the business. It was a very popular way of apportioning overheads. This is because production tended to be labour intensive in the past, and the mechanisms existed to record labour hours attributable to particular unit costs. Now it's much more difficult to work out absorption costs because there are fewer workers and more machines, and the machines are becoming more sophisticated. There's computer-aided manufacturing techniques and computer-aided machining. So direct labour hours may not be a good basis for apportioning costs, simply because what is the productivity of the person? Is it the productivity of the person or the productivity of the machine? It may be that the person is only needed to press a button to start the machine and press a button to stop the machine. After that, the machine does everything. Well, it wouldn't be right to attribute all of the output to the person who pressed the button. Presumably it's the machine who's done all the work. So looking at labour hours as a way of working out the absorption rate may not be appropriate. In modern production methods tend to be more mechanized. This has two effects. The nature of production overhead is changing. Costs such as power, machine maintenance and depreciation are becoming larger and more prevalent. So perhaps absorption should be based on the capital cost of the machines, or perhaps it's based on power usage, or it could be based on something related to the machine rather than the person, because the machines are becoming more and more important in the workplace. The number of labour hours is reducing. This leads to very high figures for hourly absorption rates based on direct labour. It does appear that if we are using direct labour and there are fewer and fewer workers and yet output is increasing, then it appears that the workers are becoming much more productive. When in fact, as I said earlier, the truth is the machines are becoming much more productive, not the people. The use of machine hours as an absorption base can help to overcome this problem, since machine hours are more likely to reflect the incidence of machine-based overheads. So looking at machine hours as opposed to labour hours. But that may not be very accurate either, because machines vary so much. And also some machines may be older than others within the organisation. Perhaps it should be based on the most recent price of the machines, the cost of the machines when they were purchased. Maybe that could be a basis for apportionment. But using labour at a time when labour is becoming less significant in the workplace doesn't seem appropriate. However, modern management accounting systems which use absorption costing have gone further than this, and a technique called activity-based costing has been developed, and that's the subject matter of separate videos, and that's one we need to pay particular attention to. It's important to understand absorption costing and the principles of absorption costing as we've set them out here. So it's well worthwhile going back over this and making your own notes and ensuring that you understand the various arguments that have been put forward for and against, and how absorption is calculated. But it's also important to understand the problems associated with it, particularly when it's used by management to try and apportion costs into the next time period using some overhead apportionment rate. Now that's tricky, and it does lead to over and under absorption of the overheads. And then there are the issues of looking at the base on which the absorption should be placed. Should it be based on labour, or on machine time, or on some other method? So it's important to separate out these points and make your own notes associated with them. This is a good starting point for the whole discussion of absorption costing, and as I said, moving on to activity-based costing, which is a different system and one that is very important to understand as well. But that's all we're going to deal with in this session, so let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.